question. So sabi niya dito, a research question is a specific inquiry. And this inquiry is something that you want to provide answer. So you want to provide a response to it. So your research question is basically the goal of your topic. Ano nga ba yung objective or yung gusto mong malaman tungkol doon sa topic mo? So for example, ang topic mo ay math anxiety. Okay? So very broad yung topic na math anxiety. Pero for your research, you want to focus on the awareness of students about math anxiety. Alam ba ng mga estudyante kung ano ang math anxiety? Are they experiencing symptoms of math anxiety? And what are possible factors that contributes to them experiencing math anxiety? So yung problem is the idea of math anxiety or math phobia, kung pareho man sila or magkaiba. So gusto mong malaman how many high school students are experiencing symptoms for math anxiety at ano yung mga possible reasons why they are experiencing these symptoms. So yun yung gusto mong malaman. Yun yung end goal or yun yung objective ng topic mo for your research. So based on this objective, you will come up with several research questions na you really want to focus on for your paper. Okay? So sabi niya dito, a research question, syempre, it is a question that you will be answering. So kayo din ang sasagot nitong research question na to at the end of your research process. So syempre, yung isasagot ninyo doon sa research ninyo will be coming from the survey and will be coming from the interviews and will be coming from the observations that you will be doing. So kung dito sa Pilipinas, nag-survey ka kung kung ano yung level of awareness ng mga estudyante when it comes to math anxiety. Baka naman first time lang din nilang marinig yung word na yon. Nararanasan na pala nila yung ibang symptoms pero hindi pala nila alam na yun yung tawag doon. So based on your survey, nalaman mo na napakababa ng awareness ng mga high school students about math anxiety. Pero even if mababa yung kanilang awareness, maraming estudyante ang nakakaranas ng symptoms ng math anxiety. So when we say nakakaranas ng symptoms, ibig sabihin nun, hindi ibig sabihin nun sila ay meron ng anxiety problem, ha? Kasi isa yun sa mga nakita kong issue sa mga topics na binigay ninyo. Very quick tayo to diagnose or to identify people as addicts or depressed or may mga anxiety issues, may mga mental health issues. And we have to understand na sakit po yung mga yon at before mo masabing may sakit ang isang tao, syempre kailangan mo ng isang professional na talagang magda-diagnose sa kanila na sila ay merong ganitong uri ng mental health issues. So yung addiction po, marami kasi dito sa klase na to ang nag-suggest ng mobile game addiction. So ang lagi kong comment sa inyo is that ang addiction kasi is a mental health issue na kailangan i-diagnose ng isang professional. Hindi siya nakadepende sa tagal ng oras na naglalaro. So pag sinabi mong 12 hours siyang naglalaro ng ML, automatic addict yon. That is wrong. Okay? Merong several symptoms na kailangan mai-observe ng isang psychologist or psychiatrist dito sa taong to para masabing siya ay talagang internet addict or cyber addict. So hindi lang yon nakadepende sa tagal or haba ng oras na naisispend sa paglalaro ng mobile games. So yung idea kasi natin ng addict is yun yung habitual, laging ginagawa, or you spend a lot of your time doing that action or that activity. Pero it's not enough for you to categorize if a person is an addict or not. So hindi ko siya in-approve yung mga topic na yon kasi you are not qualified experts to really categorize and diagnose and identify people as addicts or not. So ang naging suggestion doon ni Miss Kesha is that instead of using addicts, pwedeng ang i-correlate ninyo is yung number of hours spent playing mobile games, and its correlation to, for example, yung lagi nyo sinasabi is academic performance. So habang mas humahaba ba yung time that you spend playing mobile games, mas naapektuhan ba yung academic performance? So yun, acceptable yun. Kasi measurable on your part yung number of hours that you spend playing mobile games. Pero hindi mo siya kinakategorize as addicts or not. Okay? So yun, acceptable yun. So yun yung research question natin. That is our goal. Yun yung gusto nating i-focus or i-explore for your research. And like I said, at the end of the day, kayo din ang sasagot nitong research question na to based on doon sa magiging results ng survey ninyo, based doon sa magiging result ng inyong interview at ng inyong mga observations. Okay? So let's continue. Sabi niya dito, anong tawag dito? Sabi niya, you are going to analyze and interpret your data. And then after analyzing and interpreting your data, then the answer to these research questions will be in the last part of your paper, which is your conclusion. Okay? So tatandaan natin, iba yung questions, research questions sa survey questionnaire. So yung mga tinatanong natin sa research question, yun yung objective or yung general goal natin for your research. At kayo yon as a researcher ang sasagot ng research questions na to. So this is how we come up with your research question. So syempre, we start with a topic. So kaya nga ang pinakaunang activity ninyo is to identify possible topics that you are interested in. And from these topics, sasalain natin yan on whether your topic is approved or not. At yung mga topics na approved na yon, okay, you have to learn more about it. So sabi nga niya, kailangan mong mag-increase yung working knowledge mo about that topic. So you can achieve that by reading, by asking experts or people within the community na sa tingin ninyo ay knowledgeable about these topics at makakatulong sa inyo para mas maintindihan ng maayos, malinaw yung inyong topic. And then from there, you have to identify ano yung mga issues or yung mga gaps within this topic. So when we say gaps kasi, tatandaan natin na hindi pa kompleto or may mga topic na hindi pa maayos ang pagkakaintindi natin, especially in the Philippines. So may mga ideas pa about a certain topic na hindi pa talaga na-establish. Okay? So yun yung tinatawag nating gap spotting. Ibig sabihin, kulang pa yung kaalaman natin about dito sa area na to. So pwedeng yun yung maging research question mo. Kasi di ba ang sabi natin, research, isa sa benefit niya is that it increases your knowledge. So mas marami kang natututunan when you are doing when you are researching. So ganun din, kapag tayo ay nagdadagdag ng kaalaman, then ibig sabihin we are doing the primary goal of doing research, which is adding or increasing the body of knowledge. So identify natin, meron pa bang anong tawag dito? Meron pa bang mga gaps in terms of this topic? So for example, ngayon sa education, napansin ko in your class, iisa ang idea ninyo when it comes to online education at saka home schooling. So ibig sabihin, mali yung pagkakaintindi ng tao or meron silang tinatawag na knowledge gap when it comes to homeschooling at saka online education. Kasi online education and homeschooling are actually different things. Hindi po sila magkapareho. Hindi ibig sabihin nag-aaral kayo ngayon sa bahay ninyo ay kayo ay nag-homeschooling na. Mali po yun. Ang homeschooling po ay ganun kay Cheska Garcia at saka yung mga anak niya. Kasi yung mga anak ni Cheska Garcia ay homeschooling. Ibig sabihin, nag-aaral talaga sila sa bahay at ang nagtuturo sa kanila ay si Cheska Garcia, yung nanay nila. Siya yung nagtuturo sa mga anak niya kung paano mag-compute ng math, kung paano mag-construct ng sentences. Yun po ang homeschooling. Yung iba naman, nagbabayad sila ng isang teacher na pupunta sa bahay nila para turuan yung kanilang anak. Yun po ay homeschooling. Hindi sila naka-enroll sa kahit anong school. Nag-aaral sila on their own. Okay? At the end of, for example, at the end of grade 6, para masabi ng government na pwede na silang mag-high school, meron silang tinitake na exam to check kung enough yung skills at enough yung knowledge nila for them to continue in high school. Kasi nga, wala naman silang talagang school na nag-a-assess sa kanila. So yun po yung homeschooling. Very little ang mga tao sa Pilipino na nag-e-enroll sa homeschooling. Usually, ang mga nag-homeschooling, yung mga artista, yung mga artista dati na dahil sila ay nagtatrabaho na, so yung education nila importante pa rin, pero nag-aaral sila dun sa oras na kung saan lang sila pwede, kung gabi man yan or hindi. So meron na nag-aaral sila on their own, tapos magti-take na lang sila ng exam to check kung enough yung knowledge nila to graduate high school, to graduate from college. So yan mga yan. So kayo po, even if you are at home, you are not homeschooling students. So yung mga nag-suggest ng homeschooling, wala kayong makikita halos na respondents for your homeschooling. So kung nagbasa kayo about your topic, then you will learn na magkaiba pala siyang modality of learning. Kaya yung idea of homeschooling na yan, hindi siya very popular in the Philippines. Okay? Ang ginagawa natin ngayon ay online education. So yung mga tao naman na nagsuggest ng online education, marami-rami din yan. Ang naging comment ko lagi sa inyo is that dahil napapanahon talaga siya, halos lahat kayo, meaning ko sa inyo, 80% of your class nakasulat ang online education sa list of topics ninyo. So number 1, ang concern ko doon is that pare-pareho kayo ng topic. So pag in-approve ko to sa inyong lahat, the chances of you having the same topic with another group, napakataas. And that is not allowed. Your panel will not allow that more than one group will have similar topics. So yun yung isang concern ko. At the same time, most of you wants to evaluate the effectiveness of online classes. And my other concern with that is that you don't have enough data. Kasi hindi naman lahat ng schools nag-offer ng online classes. Tapos yung mga nag-offer ng online classes, it's their first year implementing online classes. Parang piloting pa lang talaga sila. So 1 year worth of data for me is not enough to be very conclusive doon sa idea ninyo na effective man siya or hindi. You have to give it some time. Siguro you have to give it like 3 to 5 years to really have enough data to evaluate if effective siya or hindi. Kasi kapag kaunang taon talaga, chances are lahat maninibago, marami pang kailangang ayusin. Even yung isa sa ginawa kong study, I only have 10 months worth of data for number of COVID cases. Ang sinabi din talaga ng prof is not, hindi siya sufficient, hindi siya enough to be very conclusive if there is a pattern or not. So kailangan ko pa siyang dagdagan. So hintayin ko pa yung 2 or 3 years para masabing enough yung data na gagamitin ko for my study. So yung 1 year worth of data ninyo for online education is not enough. Number 3, isa sa concern ko when it comes to online education is that hindi mahihirapan kayong mag-gather ng very objective data. So when we say objective, ibig sabihin walang bias, wala kayong preconceived na ideas about it. Kasi may mga tao na sasagutin nila hindi effective. Pero were they very objective when they say no, that it's not effective? Baka naman yung idea nila ng hindi effective is because very inconvenient sa kanila kasi hindi yun yung nakasanayan nila. Yun yung sinasabi nilang sana face-to-face na lang. Kasi yung face-to-face, yun yung comfortable para sa kanila. Yun yung nakasanayan nila. Pero tawang-tawa nga ako dun sa meme na yun na sabi mo face-to-face, pero nung face-to-face, hindi ka rin naman nakikinig. Sabi mo gusto mo face-to-face, pero nung face-to-face, hindi ka rin naman nagpapasa. So anong pinagkaiba ng face-to-face tsaka online education? Kasi minsan yung idea natin is that gusto natin to kasi yun yung kinalakihan, yun yung kinasanayan natin. And nature ng tao na talagang we are very resistant to changes. As much as possible, we want to stick dun sa kung ano yung alam natin at ano yung comfort zone natin. So syempre, ang idea natin is ayoko, hindi siya effective, mas gusto ko yung ganito. Pero were you very objective in evaluating? So yun yung isa sa concern ko doon. Baka hindi kayo makahanap ng objective na data, na answers from people. So syempre, yung magiging conclusion ninyo will not be reliable kasi hindi rin naging objective yung data na ginamit ninyo. At aminin man natin sa hindi, mangyayari at mangyayari siya. Kasi meron na tayong preconceived na idea na mahirap yung ganito, na ayaw natin ng ganyan. At mahirap alisin yon sa isip ng tao. So, hindi ako nag-approve ng mga topics evaluating the effectiveness of online education for those 3 reasons. Okay? So, kung ma-justify nyo sa akin na very objective yung mga data na magagather ninyo, sufficient siya in terms of number, at anong tawag dito, talagang yun yung topic of interest niyo, then I will accept. Pero yun yung nakikita kong possible problems if you will push through with this topic. Okay? So identify niyo ano nga ba yung issues about doon sa topic at sa research questions na yun. And then after nyo ma-identify yung mga problems or issues or yung mga gaps, then you come up with your research question or research questions. So tatandaan natin, hindi kailangang iisa lang ang research question. It can be multiple. Pero for the given time period, I think you can focus on 1 to 3 research questions lang muna. Yun yung kakayanin natin gawin within your given time period. So sabi natin, kailangan ang isang research ay time-bound. So yung time na meron tayo, I think possible lang yung 1 to 3 research questions. So wag tayong mag-focus sa iisa lang para madali lang. Kung talaga namang okay na magkaroon ng 2 or 3 at sa tingin mo related naman yung mga questions na yun with each other, then why not? Iisang survey lang naman din, kaya mo nang sagutin yung 3 research questions. Hindi naman ibig sabihin maraming questions, ibig sabihin maraming different gathering of data ka pang gagawin. Hindi naman ganun yung ibig sabihin nun. Okay? So here are some of the things that you have to consider when you are writing your research question. Number 1, syempre you have to focus on a single topic and problem. So you have to make sure that your research questions are related to your actual research topic. So dapat magkaka-connect sila. Hindi sila pwedeng sabog. Kung ano yung topic mo na in-introduce mo sa chapter 1 mo, dapat tungkol doon din yung research questions mo. So they should be focused on a single topic. Okay? And sabi niya ganon, dapat they are connected to each other. Okay? They are related to each other. Okay? So next is that, sabi niya, one of the things that you have to consider is that your research questions should be answerable. Sabi natin, in chapter 5, sa conclusion, you will be answering, you as the researchers will be answering your research questions. So kailangan ma-check mo, nasasagutan ba yung research questions na ni-layout mo sa chapter 1. And how are we going to answer your research question? Siyempre, we are going to gather data. Hindi natin siya sasagutin based on ano yung alam natin. We are going to gather data from the people. So we can use primary or we can use secondary data. Ano nga ba yung pinagkaiba ng primary at secondary data? For the primary data, these are data that you have collected yourself. Ikaw mismo ang nag-collect ng information na yon. So for example, you surveyed 50 people within your community. Pinasagutan mo sila ng isang survey. Nag-send ka ng link para sa survey, they answered it. So yung data na yon, ikaw mismo ang nag-gather, then that is considered as primary data. So ngayon, may idea ka na kung ano yung nasa isip at nasa puso ng mga tao within your community about your topic. You can also conduct you can also conduct interviews. Ayaw mong mag-survey, gusto mo mag-interview kasi mas marami kang information na makukuha kasi kahit ilang questions pwede mong ibato during your interview, then go. Ikaw naman ang mag-i-interview sa mga respondents mo. So that is considered as primary data. Kung historical ang inyong research, you can use diaries or journals of actual people. For example, ang topic mo ay experiences ng tao when it comes to Mount Pinatubo. Eruption, before, during, and after the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991. Timely yon. Kasi naglabas na kahapon ng signal number 1 when it comes to Mount Pinatubo. So malayo pa yung possibility na mag-erupt siya, pero it's already showing signs na pwede siyang mag-erupt within the next few years. If not this year, then within the next few years. So medyo timely yung idea of Mount Pinatubo. Gusto mong malaman ano yung experiences ng mga tao, ano yung mga na-observe nila before sumabog yung Mount Pinatubo in 1991. Wala ka nang makausap na tao, meron kang nakita na diary ng isang tao na nabuhay during that time at i-detail niya everyday kung ano yung nangyayari sa buhay niya before, during, and after the eruption of Mount Pinatubo. So that is considered as primary data kasi siya mismo yung nagsulat. So parang nag-interview ka lang ng isang tao. First-hand information yung nakukuha mo. So that is what we call as primary data. Another primary data is based on your observations. Ano ba yung na-observe mo na commonly na-experience ng mga taong nagsispend ng 10 to 12 hours playing mobile games every day? Are they lethargic? Are they always sleepy? Mainitin ba yung ulo nila palagi? Sila ba ay masiyahin? Sila ba ay very carefree at madaling kausap? So ano yung mga observations mo? All of those are considered as primary data. And you can gather and collect primary data to help you answer your research questions. Other than that, we can also use what we call as your secondary data. So when we say secondary data, ibig sabihin other people collected these data for you. Pero pwede mo pa rin siyang gamitin kahit na ibang tao ang nangolekta ng data na yon. So another an example of a secondary data is information coming from the newspaper. So hindi ikaw yung nangolekta ng information na yon. Yung journalist ang nangolekta ng information na yon. Pero if you think na usable at importante siya para masagutan mo tong research questions, then yes, you can use newspaper articles as your secondary data. Meron namang mga documentaries, for example, yung The Notebook in GMA7 or yung mga documentaries ni Jessica Soho about a certain phenomenon or a certain group of people. Pwede mong panoorin yon and you can get ideas about it. May mga documentary about Mount Pinatubo, may documentary about Yolanda, may mga interview sila ng mga tao who were there in Mount Pinatubo and who were there during the Yolanda. Pwede mong gamitin yung data na yon. You did not collect it, but it's usable for you in your research. So pwede kang gumamit ng secondary data. So we can use primary data, we can use secondary data, we can use a combination of primary and secondary data. Basta lahat ng magagather natin na data will be able to help us in answering your research question. Kasi pag na-answer nyo na yung research question na yon, ibig sabihin, nasagutan nyo na yung objective or yung goal, yung pinaka-focus ng research mo. Okay? So, other than that, you have to take note that a research question should not ask for subjective ideas or subjective opinion or very judgmental opinion. Okay? So, ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo, is online education effective or not? Very subjective yon. It depends on people, kung ano yung mga preconceived ideas nila at kung ano yung mga bias nila when it comes to the topic. So, hindi siya considered as a good research question because it will not allow you to gather objective data. Okay? So, instead of asking people to compare between A and B, between online education and face-to-face class, you can measure how effective or the level of effectiveness of online education as well as the level of effectiveness of face-to-face education. Identify nyo lang ano yung mga experiences ng mga tao, identify ninyo ano yung sa tingin nilang benefits or good parts, advantages ng online education, at ano naman yung good parts or advantages or benefits ng face-to-face. Kasi meron din namang disadvantages ang online classes at meron din namang disadvantages ang face-to-face classes. So, magiging very objective lang kayo. You do not ask them to compare, but you are asking them to evaluate individually. Na i-evaluate nila to, i-evaluate din nila to. Pero yun nga, you have to be very careful with these kinds of research questions na talagang hindi siya magiging bias, na as much as possible, objective tayo. So sabi nga ni Mike Enriquez, walang kinikilingan, walang pinoprotektahan, serbisyong totoo lamang. So that's what we mean when we say objective. Hindi tayo nag-i-evaluate ng nakabase sa kung ano yung usual na naririnig natin, but really based kung ano nga ba yung na-experience natin. So hindi dapat tayo madaling maapektuhan na mga outside ideas or preconceived ideas ng ibang tao. Another thing to consider when you are writing a research question, please po, do not ask the question, why? So may mga tao dito, ang topic nila, for example, ay teenage pregnancy. Basically, ang idea nila is, they want to know kung bakit nga ba dumadami yung number of cases ng teenage pregnancy or bakit nga ba dumadami yung mga kabataan na at a very early age, they are already mothers or they are already pregnant, future mothers. So instead of asking why, ang kailangan nating intindihin is what are the factors that influences the increase in teenage pregnancy. So hindi natin tatanungin, bakit ka nabuntis? Kundi ano yung mga bagay or ano yung mga reasons that led to this from happening. So instead of asking the question, why, we can use what or how. So yung example doon is, what are the factors that motivated you, or what are the factors that influence the increase in the number of teenage pregnancy? Is it because they are not well-educated or well-informed? Baka kulang na or hindi na effective yung sex education in the Philippines? Is it because of peer pressure? So tatanungin mo sila, ikaw ba ay naka-experience ng peer pressure to really engage in sexual activities? So i-identify natin ano yung mga reasons, possible reasons or factors na that led to this issue. And then from there, yun yung gagawin mong survey, ipapa-identify mo na sa kanila, sa mga factors na to, ano yung sa tingin mo pinakadahilan why you became pregnant at a very early age. So what are the factors instead of asking why? Or for example, you can say how. How is the sex education or how is teenage pregnancy affected by the sex education program in the Philippines? So kung sasabihin nila na hindi naman effective or hindi naman masyadong sineryoso, baka naman pinapatupad pero hindi pa siya ganon ka-effective. So ibig sabihin, hindi sineryoso ng mga estudyante. So baka yun yung dahilan kung bakit tumataas yung cases of teenage pregnancy in the Philippines. Other than that, please make sure to use specific and well-defined concepts. So sabi natin, bawal ang generic or very general use of ideas. So kailangan very specified siya. Let's analyze this example. Sabi niya, what effect does social media have on people's minds? Social media, napakadami niyan. Depending on the location, depending on the country, iba't iba ang mga popular na social media. Philippines, popular on Twitter, tsaka Facebook and Instagram. In other countries, meron silang sariling social media na mas popular or trending sa kanila. So very general ang social media. At the same time, itong people's minds, very general to. Anong ibig sabihin mo mag sinasabi ng people's minds? How they think, their opinion, how they process ideas, retention span. So mapakalawak. So you have to be very specific. So mas okay if you will say, what effect does the daily use of Twitter? So instead of social media, ginawa niyang specific. Twitter lang ang gusto niyang i-observe. Have on the attention span. Instead of saying people's mind, ang focus lang niya is attention span of people under 16 years old. So ngayon, mas okay na siya kasi mas specific na kung ano yung gusto mong malaman about your topic. Next, please do not ask for a conclusive solution. Instead, we have to identify ano nga ba yung mga dahilan kung bakit nangyayari itong issue na to. Instead of asking people for a possible solution. Okay, so sabi nga niya, what should the government do about the low voter turnout? So hindi siya okay. Mas maganda if i-understand muna natin bakit mababa yung voter turnout. So when we say voter turnout, ayan, sa Philippines, nangyayari yan. Konti na lang sa mga kabataan ngayon ang nagpaparegister for election. At during the election day, even yung mga may edad na hindi na sila nagtitake ng time and effort to really vote and practice their right to vote. So before mo tanungin kung ano nga ba yung possible solution for this issue, identify muna natin ano nga ba yung mga dahilan or ano nga ba yung mga reasons bakit wala ng mga tao ang bumuboto. Konti na lang. Lalo sa kabataan. Sabi nyo, kayo yung mulat, kayo yung mga aware sa mga issues ng bayan, pero dahil hindi kayo bumuboto, ang nananalo na mga officials, yung mga binoboto ng mga may edad na or matanda na hindi na mulat doon sa anong tawag dito sa issues ng ating bayan. So syempre, ang kilala nila is yung mga pangalan na mula noon hanggang ngayon nandiyan na. For example, sila Hunasan, sila ang tawag dito, sila Soto. Paulit-ulit yan, sila Lacson. Nung panahon nila, yun na yung mga government officials. Hanggang ngayon, dahil yun ang kilala nila at sila yung bumoboto, yun ang paulit-ulit na nananalo. Yung mga hindi masyadong kilala dahil ngayon pa lang sila tumatakbo at alam naman ng mga kabataan na sila yung kumikilos, hindi sila nananalo kasi yung mga kabataan hindi naman bumoboto. So, chain reaction siya. We have to identify ano nga ba yung mga dahilan, tinatamad pa sila, sa tingin nila wala namang epekto sa buhay nila, wala silang tiwala sa gobyerno, wala silang tiwala dun sa mga officials, kaya wala na silang pakialam kung sinong manalo, kung sinong matalo. Let's try to identify ano muna yung possible reasons. Para pag naintindihan na natin na ito yung mga dahilan kung bakit ayaw ng bumoto ng mga kabataan, that's when we can come up with a course of action or what we call as suggested solution. So kung ang dahilan is hindi na malinaw sa mga kabataan kung ano nga ba yung responsibilidad ng isang SK chairman, ano nga ba yung responsibilidad ng SK kagawad, ano nga ba yung responsibilidad ng kagawad ng bayan. Baka hindi nyo na alam kung ano yung mga responsibilidad nila. Kaya pag bumoboto, hindi nyo na alam na, okay, so ito yung trabaho niya, so dapat yung taong buboto ko, ganito yung qualifications. Or, anong tawag dito, di na natin alam, so wala na tayong pakialam, kaya ayaw na natin bumoto. Isa to sa mga tinatawanan naming topic nung nakaraan. nagpa-survey yung mga grade 12 students. Ano ba nga daw ba yung idea ng kabataan kung ano ang function ng SK sa isang barangay? At ang lumabas sa survey nila is yung mga SK, yung mga nagpapabasketball. Yun lang yung idea nila. Pero yun nga lang ba yung responsibilidad ng isang SK chairman or ng mga SK kagawad sa barangay ninyo? Magpapaliga ng basketball. So, ibig sabihin, hindi na ganun kalawak yung information or awareness natin sa mga different roles and responsibilities ng mga officials natin. So, pag bumoto tayo, sino iboboto nyo? Yung magaling mag-basketball? Yung maraming pera pang sponsor ng jersey? Ganon. Siyempre, hindi na maayos yung nagiging turnout. So, let's try to identify first, ano yung yung mga factors that contributes to this problem. And then from there, saka tayo magsasuggest ng possible solutions. Yung suggestion ng possible solutions, manggagaling na sa inyo. Nakabase doon sa kinuha or ginather ninyo na data coming from your respondents. At yung sasagutan nila is, ano nga ba yung mga reasons or ano nga ba yung mga dahilan bakit nangyayari itong problema na to. Okay? And then another thing to consider is that your research question should not be answerable by a yes or no. Bawal po magtanong kayo na, is online education effective? Yes or no? That's wrong. Okay? So, if your research question is answerable by yes or no, then you have to reconstruct your research question. So, for example here, has there been an increase in homelessness in UK in the past 10 years? Mas dumami ba yung mga taong nakatira sa lansangan within the past 10 years? So, answerable by yes or no yan, it has to be rephrased. So, instead, you can say that, how does the economy of this certain country influence or affected the increase or the decrease in the number of homelessness in that area? So, pag gumanda ba yung ekonomiya nila, mas kumukonte yung mga tao sa lansangan. Pag bumababa ba ang kanilang ekonomiya, mas tumataas ang taong nakatira sa lansangan. Or baka wala namang epekto. Regardless kung gumanda or pumangit yung ekonomiya, pag ikaw ay taong lansangan ka talaga. So, you can rephrase your ideas na hindi siya dapat answerable by yes or no. So yung idea ninyo is online education effective or not, that's answerable by yes or no. So hindi siya acceptable as a good research question. Instead, you can say that what is the level of effectiveness of online education from the, for example, from the perspective of parents. So level of effectiveness ang i-measure ninyo. So you can ask them to answer 1 to 5. 1, not very effective. 2, not effective. 3, neutral. Number 4, effective. Number 5, very effective. So you can ask them to rate ng merong quantitatively, meron siyang level. It's not just a flat out yes or no. And then from there, you can ask them ano yung mga aspects ng online education na sa tingin nila ay effective at ano yung mga aspeto ng online education na sa tingin nila ay hindi effective. So you can ask them to rate that. Okay, so double check nyo lang if it's answerable by a yes or no. And then after you answer your research questions, you will come up with your research hypothesis. Now, your research hypothesis is basically yung idea ninyo or yung hula ninyo na mangyayari doon sa inyong research. So, meron na kayong expected results. Meron na kayong, sa tingin ninyo ay, ito yung magiging sagot dito sa aking research question. Kasi syempre, you have read, nakapagbasa kayo, nagpalawak kayo ng information about your topic. So, nung marami na kayong nalaman about your topic, so syempre meron na kayong idea kung bakit nangyayari yon. So, for example, teenage pregnancy. Nung nagbasa kayo about teenage pregnancy, nalaman mo na in the US, ito pala yung reasons kung bakit tumataas yung number of teenage pregnancy. Pagdating sa ibang bansa, ito yung reasons. So, syempre, you can apply that idea in the Philippines and you can hypothesize na ito din yung mga dahilan kung bakit nagkakaroon ng teenage pregnancy in the Philippines. So based on your readings, based on what you have learned about your topic, you can have an expected output. And your expected result is your hypothesis. Now, this hypothesis is subject to acceptance or ibig sabihin ng accepted na hypothesis, kung ano yung expected output mo, yun yung talagang naging result ng inyong research. So expectations versus reality, pareho sila. Kung ano yung in-expect mo, yun yung talagang nangyari. In that case, you're going to accept your hypothesis. Pero, there is also a possibility that your hypothesis will not be accepted and instead, it will be rejected. It happens. Kasi yun yung idea ng expectations versus reality. Na ito yung ine-expect mo, pero hindi yun yung nangyari sa totoong buhay. At ito yung isang magandang question na na-erase sa klase ninyo nung nakaraan. I don't remember, pero we have one of the class na nagtanong, kapag ba rejected daw ang hypothesis, does it mean na mali or failure na yung research ninyo? And the answer is no. Kasi kailangan nating tandaan na hindi lahat ng ini-expect natin, yun yung nangyayari. So very natural lang, even in your research, na baka applicable to sa ibang lugar, applicable to in some people, pero hindi natin masasabi na sa Pilipinas or within our community, the same thing will happen. So in that case, ito yung ine-expect mo, pero hindi ito yung nangyari. Balik tayo doon sa idea ng temperature at saka number of flu cases. So sa ibang bansa, talagang ang temperature sa kanila bumababa pagdating ng winter time, December, January, and February. So during those times, tumataas talaga yung number of flu cases sa kanila. Kasi napakalamig ng panahon. Pero pag in-apply natin yung sa Pilipinas, wala naman tayong winter. Lumalamig ng January, lumalamig ng February, pero hindi ganun sa certain level of temperature na na-experience nila sa ibang lugar. So can we say na applicable yung pattern na yun in the Philippines? Maaaring yes, maaaring no. So kung hindi applicable yon in the Philippines, then you have to reject the hypothesis. Baka naman ang number of flu cases natin nag-i-increase during the rainy season. Kasi during the rainy season, malamig yung panahon, ang tawag dito, nagkakaroon ng baha, may mga stagnant water, so dumadami yung dengue cases at saka elephantiasis. So mas madami yung nagkakasakit ng June, July, August, and September. So kung yun yung naging result mo, then you have to reject the hypothesis. But does it mean na naging mali or failure yung research mo? The answer is no. Tama yung ginawa mo, successful pa rin yung research mo. And you were able to establish that this phenomenon is observable in these places, pero in the Philippines, it's not. This phenomenon is observed in a different time. So nakadagdag ka pa rin doon sa body of information. Na merong paniniwala na ikaw ay napatunayang mali pala at hindi applicable sa ating lugar. So do not be afraid if yung research ninyo, iba yung magiging result and you have to reject your hypothesis. Walang mali if you reject your hypothesis. Okay? Tatandaan natin na ang mga kaalaman natin ngayon, it is still subject to change. Di ba, si Galileo Galilei, sabi niya, ang mundo ay center of the universe, center of the solar system. And a lot of people believed him to be true. Tapos nung pinatunayan ni Copernicus na hindi Earth ang nasa gitna, but instead the Sun, maraming tao ang nagalit sa kanya, kinulong pa siya. Pero in the end, napatunayan na ang tama pala is Copernicus, that it's the Sun that is in the middle of the solar system. So ganun din yung information natin ngayon. They are still subject to change, depende sa location, depende sa generation, or maaaring talagang mali yung unang paniniwala natin at kailangan ng mapalitan ng mas tama. Okay? So, isa yan sa mga reminder ko sa inyo, do not be afraid to reject your hypothesis because there is nothing wrong with rejecting a hypothesis. Now, things to make sure when you are writing your hypothesis. So, syempre, make sure that it is related to your research questions. Dapat magkakadugtong-dugtong yan, yung topic ninyo, yung research questions and hypothesis ninyo. And later on, nakadugtong yan doon sa gagamitin ninyong tool such as a survey kung paano ninyo masasagutan yung mga research questions. Next, you have to understand that the hypothesis follows the pattern of an if and then statement. Kasi nakadepende yan sa ating mga variables. So last time we identified ano ang independent variable at ano yung dependent variable. So yung if statement, nakadepende siya sa independent variable. If the temperature is low or pag malamig, then the number of flu cases increases. Yun yung dependent variable natin. Yung ino-observe natin na dami ng taong nagkakasakit. If the temperature is high, ibig sabihin mainit, then the number of sick people decreases. Mas kumukonti yung taong may sakit. If I water my plants every day, then my plants will grow taller. But if I water my plants once a week, then my plants will not grow tall. So yun yung pattern ng ating hypothesis. Nakadepende siya doon sa identified variables ninyo. So kailangan nyo ring i-identify what is your independent variable, what is your dependent variable, and what are your controlled variables. Okay? So I have an example here. The idea here in these cases is that yung halaman, meron siyang natural na parasite. At yung natural parasite niya na yun is yung aphids. Ito yung kulay puti na dumadami sa dahon, sa tangkay, or sa bulaklak ng isang halaman. Para siyang bulak, pero insect siya. It's a parasite that steals the nutrients coming from the plant. So ang sabi niyang ganon, in order to remove or to lower down the number of aphids in a plant, pwede kong i-expose yung halaman sa ladybugs, another insect, na kakain nitong aphid. So pag yung plant ay merong ladybug, ibig sabihin mas magiging healthy siya kasi kinakain ng ladybug yung parasite doon sa halaman. Compared dun sa isang halaman na may aphids pero wala siyang ladybug. So dahil walang ladybug, walang kumakain ng aphid, so marami yung parasites doon sa plants, ibig sabihin hindi siya healthy. So yun yung idea niya. Meron siyang dalawang hypothesis dito. Hypothesis letter A says that aphid-infected plants that are exposed to ladybugs will have fewer aphids after a week than aphid-infected plants which are left untreated. In hypothesis letter B, sabi niya, ladybugs are a good natural pesticide for treating aphid-infected plants. So, iisa yung idea nila, pero dalawa, magkaiba yung pagkaka-state ng kanilang hypothesis. Now, my question is, between hypothesis A and hypothesis B, ano ang mas tama na pagkakasulat ng hypothesis? Please jot down your answers if it is hypothesis A or if it is hypothesis B. Pakisulat na lang po sa chat box kung ano yung sa tingin yung mas tama between the two statements or two hypotheses. So sabi ni Rachel, siya ay hypothesis A. How about the other students? Is it hypothesis A or hypothesis B? Or tulog na kayo? Sino pa ang nakikinig dyan? Paki-chat down yung inyong mga answers maliban kay Rachel. Cassie also agree. Sabi niya, hypothesis A. How about yung iba? Gio, Abigail, Esther, Jedaya, Jarens, Ivan, James, Mizan, Aiden, Israel A, si Gio A, Princess Almira A din. So, puro A ang sagot Ivan A, King Cedric A. Okay, sige. Tanong tayo. Simula kay Rachel. Rachel, why do you think it is a hypothesis A na mas tama yung pagkakakonstruct ng hypothesis statement?
Sure, I think it's more specific than the hypothesis B. Kasi po yun sa hypothesis B, naka-generalized po siya.
Okay, so sa tingin mo yung ginamit niyang words is more specific compared to hypothesis B. Let's ask another one. How about si James Valdez? Kuya James, bakit hypothesis A ang pinili mo? Nandito pa ba si James? Bakit hypothesis A ang sa tingin mong mas tama?
Feel ko lang, Chair.
Okay, so feel mo lang na letter A kasi marami nang sumagot ng letter A. Ganun ba yon? How about si Princess Almira? Ate, bakit letter A ang sagot mo?
Ano nga, ma'am, mas specific siya, ma'am, at saka ma'am, mas nabigay niya, ma'am, yung dapat na makuha ng reader, na maintindihan ng reader, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask you an additional follow-up question. Between the two hypotheses, saan natin mas nakikita ng malinaw yung dependent at independent variable? Is it in hypothesis A or is it in hypothesis B? Let me ask Cassie. Cassie Lai, saan mas identifiable yung independent at dependent variable?
Teacher.
Sa B. Eh, bakit A sagot mo? Okay. So, sige nga, if we are going to use hypothesis letter B, ano ang independent variable at ano yung dependent variable natin? Cassie, ano ang independent variable?
Sure, ladybug are good pesticide kasi tas yung independent niya po is yung treating aphid-infected plants.
Measurable ba yung treating aphid-infected plants? Kasi your dependent variable is the one that you will be observing. So, dapat measurable siya. So, based on hypothesis B, very clear ba kung ano ang independent at dependent variable? Let's ask another student, Mizan Joy.
Sure.
Ano ang independent at ano ang dependent variable natin?
Sir, parang mas ano ako dun sa A.
Okay, sige. If we're going to use A, then ano ang independent at ano ang dependent variable natin?
Sir, independent yung have fewer aphids after a week than aphid-infected plants which are left untreated. Tapos, dependent yung aphid-infected plants that are exposed to ladybugs.
Do we agree on that? Can we ask si Esther Joy? Ano ang independent at ano ang dependent variable natin? You have to remember that the dependent variable is the one that we are observing and measuring. Ano ang dependent at independent variable in this case? Esther Joy.
Sa ano po, ma'am, sa A po.
Okay.
Same lang rin po doon kay Misan. Yung ano po, yung dependent is yung independent po yung infected plants that are exposed to ladybugs will have fewer. Tapos yung sa dependent po, yung fewer aphids after a week than aphid-infected plants which are left untreated.
Okay, ang nangyayari, sineseparate nyo yung statement, ha? Review kayo ng independent at dependent variable, kasama yan sa exam. How about si Faith Pauline? Can you identify the dependent and the independent variable, ate? Ano yung measurable? At ano yung pinagkaiba ng dalawang yon?
Ganun din po yung idea ko kay Esther.
So you are just separating the statements, which is wrong. Princess Almira.
Ma'am, ganun din po.
Mali. Ivan Tristan.
Chair, sa akin po, sa feature, sa ano po sa feature, yung independent variable chair is yung ladybugs are a good natural pesticide. And
Okay.
then, the dependent variable chair is parang yung chair, kasi yung observe natin kung talagang makapag-treat siya ng aphid-infected plants.
Okay.
For me, ma'am, yun po.
Okay. So ano ang ino-observe at mini-measure natin, Ivan? Kung effective yung ladybugs or hindi. Ano ang kailangan nating i-measure?
Chair, yung result po, chair.
Which is, ano nga? Ano ang ine-expect mong result?
Na matitreat, chair, yung
Paano mo masasabing natitreat siya? Ano yung observable fact na nasasabi mong effective to?
pag nabawasan, chair, yung aphid.
Okay. So ang dependent variable natin is the number of aphids. Dumami? Did it stay the same? Kumonte. Pag kumonte yung aphids, we can say na effective na pesticide yung ladybug. Pag if it stayed the same or dumami, we can say na hindi siya effective. Kasi walang nabawas or dumami pa yung number of aphid infection. Yun ang dependent variable natin. Ano ang independent variable? Whether or not merong exposure sa ladybug or wala. Yung isang plant may ladybug, yung isang plant walang ladybug. Yun ang independent variable, the exposure to the ladybugs. So when you identify the independent and dependent variable, wag nyo lang paghihiwalayin yung statement. Kasi pag pinaghiwalayin nyo yung statement, what you are basically identifying is the independent variable. Yung isang plant that is exposed to the ladybug for 1 week. At saka yung isang plant that was left untreated. Yun yung in-identify nyo. That is the independent variable. Pero does it identify the dependent variable? No. You are trying to check kung natural pesticide ba siya. And how are you going to say if natural pesticide siya? Dapat kumukonti yung parasites. Okay? So, identify nyo yung dependent and independent variable. In this case, mas maliwanag siya sa hypothesis A. Ito kasing natural pesticide na to is a very general term. Pero very specific siya dito sa hypothesis A. Natural pesticides will have fewer aphids. Yung isa, stay the same pa din siya. Okay? So, in this case, mas okay yung hypothesis letter A. Other than the identification of the independent and the dependent variables, mas okay yung hypothesis A because it follows the if and then statement. If I expose this plant to ladybugs, then it will have fewer aphid infection. If I do not expose this plant to ladybugs, then it will have the same number of aphid infection. Okay? So in that case, na-satisfy niya yung requirement of what a good hypothesis is all about. Okay? So that is the end of my discussion. I just want to point out that for your research exam, it will be on Friday at exactly 9:15. So I give you 15 minutes to still prepare yourself, grab yourself some water or some snacks, go to an area na okay ang internet connection ninyo, make sure na may enough battery charge yung mga cellphones ninyo. You have enough mobile data for those of you who are using prepaid to access yung ating link. So at exactly 9:15, please go to the Google Classroom, click the link, and then you have 1 hour to answer the exam. So hindi na natin kailangang magkita-kita sa Google Meet. All you have to do is to go to the Google Classroom. Ang coverage natin is starting from the very beginning. The SMART characteristics of a good research topic, 5 yan, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. We have the overview of the differences, advantages, and disadvantages between quantitative and qualitative research. We also learned about the different kinds of qualitative research. So meron tayong 5, may ethnography, phenomenology, narrative or historical, case study, at saka yung action research. We also learned about the kinds of quantitative research. Meron tayong 4, descriptive, correlation, causal comparative, at saka experimental. We also learned about the different elements of a good research paper, including yung academic honesty, plagiarism, how are we going to achieve good content, checking for the technicalities, ideas of proofreading, kasama yan. Your exam is a total of 50 points. The questions that you will encounter includes multiple choice, identification of variables, so yung ginawa natin kanina at saka nung last time. I will be giving you a situation. You will tell me ano yung independent variables at ano yung dependent variables, ano yung mga pwedeng maging controlled variables in that situation. So paki-review po yung variables and identification of the different variables. And then of course, meron akong mga short essay questions. So tulad nga ng sabi ko kanina, please po, take time to answer your exams. 1 hour is enough, pero wag pong madaliin. Mas gugustuhin kong you take the time and you really try to answer as many of it as you can. Hindi ko kailangan ng mahabang answer, pero kailangan ko ng may laman na answer. I'm checking the content and not the length. So kung paiikot-ikutin mo lang din ako, pero walang laman yung sagot. And double check po na you're not allowed to Google your answers, na didetect yan ng ating autoproctor. You are also not allowed to, to ask other people for answers in your exam. So, nadidetect siya somehow ng autoproctor. And then, paki-double check if you have submitted the reflection paper on the importance of research. This was originally submitted in the old Google Classroom. Pero for those who have not yet submitted, pwede na ninyong isubmit dito sa new Google Classroom. So if you see your names here, then you have not submitted yet, paki-submit na po. And then yung ating research topic list, again, this was submitted in the old Google Classroom. Pero kung hindi pa kayo nakakapag-submit, then you can still follow up dito sa new Google Classroom. If you see your names here, ibig sabihin, wala pa kayong sinasubmit. And then yung chapter 1 natin, it was originally due nung Tuesday night. So meron pa rin hindi nakakapagpasa na 6 na tao. Tapos magdadagdag na ulit ako for the part 2 of your chapter 1. Okay? So double check your Google Classrooms. Make it a habit to check kung may kailangan